Scriptures. It is rooted, secondly, in the papal teaching of the last century, and it is rooted, thirdly, in the legacy of the Second Vatican Council. My point is to give you some snapshot of that content and not to try to expand it in any detail. But if we think of the Scriptures and what they offer us, the Scriptures offer our social vision the following just examples. There is first the book of Genesis, the creation account in the book of Genesis. That is where our social vision is rooted, because the creation account in Genesis helps us to think through two different things: the sacredness of the human person and the meaning of moral stewardship. Now, you know that the biblical vision of the creation of the world, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, has caused no end of controversy throughout time. There are two mistaken ways to interpret the Genesis account, the creation story. The first mistaken way is to try to do it literally, that every word is to be taken literally. If you do that, it's hard to live in the 21st century and take every word of the first 11 chapters of Genesis literally. So that gets you into all kinds of contradictions. Some of our Christian friends try to do that. I think it always fails, and it gets you into all kinds of arguments that religion and science don't go together, and that to be Christian is to be a literalist. That is not the Catholic vision. Second way to misinterpret the first 11 chapters of Genesis is to say, if you can't take them literally, then obviously you don't have to take them seriously either, that there's really nothing here to be learned from. So if you split between the literalists, take it literally, or on the other hand, simply throwing it all out, both of them miss the point. There is a message. We are not to take it literally, we are to take it seriously. How do we get at that message? We get at it by understanding how one interprets the language of the Scriptures in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis was not written by a scientist. It did not mean to solve the Big Bang Theory. It was not written by a historian. It did not mean to give us an account of how, in fact, the world was, quotes, created. I think the author of the book of Genesis was a poet, a person with a profound sense of faith, who was constantly amazed by the wonder of the world in which he lived. And as he looked around, he inevitably asked the question, whence did it come? Whence did it come? And so this person of deep faith, who had the language and the skill of a poet, began in sweeping terms to describe the world. The main thing he wanted us to know is this was God's world, and we should be at home in God's world. And so he depicts God shaping the world the way a child shapes a ball of clay. It is God who throws the stars into the sky, runs his hand through the universe and creates the valleys, sets the limits of the sea. And God slowly creates. But he creates the way you write a symphony, in a kind of rising moment that reaches a crescendo. And the crescendo of Genesis is when God says, like unto me I will make them, man and woman like unto me. This becomes the foundation stone of our social vision. Every person is created in the image of God. Every person of every age we know something about. We may not know their names, we may never see their face, but what we know is that every person is the image of God among us. Secondly, God then takes this universe he's created, and again, in the language of imagery and poetry, he turns the world over to men and women. He does it by asking them to name the animals. In the Scriptures, when you name something, you're responsible for it. So naming the animals is really a much larger reality than naming the animals. The God who brought the universe into being places it in human hands, a very large risk to be sure. But the idea for us is that we are moral stewards of the world. In every age, we have to ask, how's the world doing? In every age, we have to ask, how is it? How do we fare according to God's vision, this world that we are responsible for? What have we inherited? What will we pass on? What have we done with it while it was in our hands? The vision begins in Genesis. It then moves to the Hebrew prophets. The Hebrew prophets lived about 8 centuries before the coming of Jesus. And while they were different prophets with different messages, the prophets had a single abiding message. The prophets would come into the land of Israel and say, the quality of your faith is dependent on the character of justice in the land. Where you stand with God greatly is determined by how you stand with each other. And the prophets would then go on for the Israelites and say, and we will teach you how to judge the character of justice in the land. In every age, you are to ask how the widows, the orphans, and the resident aliens fare among you. That's the test question. Now, this all sounds archaic and ancient until you ask the Congressional Budget Office in the United States of America in 2010. Ask the Congressional Budget Office who the most vulnerable people in American society are. They're women, children, and immigrants. Orphans, widows, resident aliens. Women, children, immigrants. The voice of the prophets rings down through the ages with a specificity that could be embarrassing. Then there is the New Testament. The New Testament contributes to our moral vision by building on the Hebrew Scriptures. 2 great ideas emerge out of the New Testament. There is first the incarnation, the specifying characteristic of Christian faith. Ours is a God who took human form among us. It is interesting to think of the incarnation in light of the book of Genesis. At the dawn of creation, the beginning of time, God made us like unto God. In what the New Testament calls the fullness of time, God made God like unto us, flesh of our flesh, bone of our bones. So every human person is doubly consecrated. Consecrated by the creative act of God, and consecrated by the living Christ who shared our humanity. The very powerful notion when you look at the world around us and ask, how's moral stewardship going? So the biblical source of social vision is rich and can be expanded. The papal teaching of the 20th century goes at this a little bit differently. The Scriptures, of course, are a book rooted in faith and read in faith. But the social teaching must be shared with others. And so part of the characteristic of Catholic teaching is to find a way to take our deepest religious conviction and to translate it into language where those who do not share our faith might still find moral wisdom in what we hold.